Jesus is talking to a crowd, and well, a crowd of the disciples, here in the 4th chapter of Mark's Gospel. And Jesus says to them, "Come, let us go to the other side." He means, come, let us go to the other side of the lake. At the beginning of this chapter, chapter 4, it's established that Jesus is teaching and preaching to the crowds, which obviously include the disciples. And now, about halfway through, he says to the disciples, "Come, let us go to the other side." It's actually my favorite line in this episode. At that point, Jesus and some disciples get in a boat and start to make their way to the other side. What I think is interesting and what I kind of love about this is that we don't know which disciples get in the boat with Jesus. It just says some disciples. It could be some of the disciples that turn into apostles later on, or it could be disciples who had literally just heard what Jesus was saying and said, "Yeah, I'm on board for that," and get in the boat. But either way, there's an invitation and a response, and we find ourselves in a boat with Jesus and some disciples. Again, maybe some of these disciples will be apostles. Maybe Peter's amongst them. We don't know. Maybe some of these disciples are discerning. They've been following Jesus for some time, and they're looking for that sign in which they can finally and fully go, "Yes, this is the Son of God," but they're just in the midst of their discernment process. Maybe that's the case. Maybe some of these disciples are fresh, like they've just been around for a cup of coffee, so to speak, that they literally walked up, were part of the crowd, heard what he was saying, and thought to themselves, "Nah, this feels like a good use of a Wednesday. Let's get in the boat and see what's on the other side of the river." We really don't know. What we know is that there was an invitation, "Come, let us go to the other side," and that these disciples got in the boat with Jesus. It's there in the boat, halfway across the lake, that a storm rolls in. In typical Mark fashion, it happens very quickly. It goes from a normal day to cloudy to monsoon rains, and the waves in the lake are beating the sides of the boat. The boat is becoming swamped and starting to sink. What I think is really almost funny, if not simply ironic in this, is in the midst of the terror of the disciples, we have what is arguably the most relaxed description of Jesus. Jesus is in the stern of the boat, asleep on a cushion. Think about that. Think about how many times Jesus enters a room or sits down for a meal or even hanging out at the table at Bethany. We never get a description of a cushion anywhere else in the Gospels. But here, as the storm is rolling in, as the waves are beating up against the boat, as the boat is being swamped and waterlogged by the water that is coming in, Jesus is asleep on a cushion. I just love this image. And there, with Jesus asleep on a cushion, these disciples run down and they wake him up. And Jesus wakes up and he calms the storm in the sea, saying, "Peace, be still." A callback to Psalm 46, "Be still and know that I am God." And then begins to talk to them. What I think is really interesting about this, or the question I'd like to ask, is from where does the disciples' desire to wake up Jesus come? And from that, what I'm saying is, where is their starting point? Right? Because we talked about that the disciples in this boat may be future apostles, they may be discerning, they may be somewhat apathetic. So why are they waking up Jesus? Now, it could be that they are waking up Jesus because that they know he is the Son of God, and they know that if they wake up Jesus, Jesus will save them. And it could be that they're waking up Jesus because they're hoping that in the midst of this storm, Jesus will stop the storm and give them the sign that they are looking for in their discernment and in their faith journey, and that they will be able to get on board, pun intended, 100%. Or they could be generally more apathetic, and they could think, well, the rain's already coming down, the boat's already swamped. What's the worst that can happen if we wake up the guy who's asleep on the cushion? But regardless, from wherever their starting point is, Jesus is awoken, and they are all saved, and they all make it to the other side of the lake. Again, this is why that second sentence is my favorite text in this episode. Jesus says to the crowd of disciples, "Come, let us go to the other side." And then disciples get in. maybe future apostles, maybe mid-discerners, maybe apathetic day of show-ups. We don't know. But what we know is that Jesus offers the invitation. Jesus, we see, provides the safety. And for whatever their reason, these disciples get in the boat with Jesus. And so this is our question today. This is my question for you. Why are you in the boat? And make no mistake about it, you are in the boat. You are listening to a sermon that has been recorded and posted on YouTube. You are taking time out of your day to hear a sermon, to reflect on the Word. You are seeking out faith in some degree or another. Why are you in the boat? Why are you here? I'm thankful that you are. But why are you here? And to be honest with you, that's a much harder question. Why? Why is a much harder question than you may think, and there's a biological reason for that. See, the part of your brain, the part of my brain, the part of our brains that handle feelings and behavior is not the same as the part of the brain that handles language control, or controls language, I should say. Right? So the part of our brain that handles feeling and behavior is not the same as the part of our brain that controls language. Have you ever been trying to describe a feeling to a friend or a family member, and you kind of get frustrated and you say, well, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but I just felt this way. That's why. Because the part of your brain that handles feelings and behavior is different than the part that gives you control over language, right? It's literally where the idea of trusting your gut comes from. When you're in a situation and you're presented with choices and there's a behavior in front of you and you can't articulate why you want to do it, but you want to do it, and you say, we've all said it, I just have to trust my gut. It's because those two parts of the brains are not directly connected, right? They're connected, they're your brain, but they're not the same part of the brain. It's why when my brother would come home late when we were in school and my parents would say, why are you out so late? He would get upset and go, no reason, mom, dad. It would be kind of a monosyllabic grunt, if anything, maybe a, because it's hard to answer that question, why? However, if they would say, what were you doing? What were you doing so late tonight? He would be able to answer, I was doing this or hanging out with that person, X, Y, and Z. What were you doing is a much different question than why are you doing that? So maybe we should take a step back. And instead of me asking, why are you in the boat? I could ask you, what brings you to the boat? And I could say, what brings you to the boat? And your answer could be, well, I go to church every Sunday, and this is kind of like church, so I'm coming here. And that's great. That's a very solid reason. But I'm going to push you a little bit on that and say that sounds like a habit. I brush my teeth every night. What makes faith and a faith community different than the habit of brushing your teeth every night? Well, I come because I like the water, I know to be still and know that Jesus is God. Well, that's great. Doctrine is important, but beyond memorizing doctrine, what is it that brings you back? I have friends who go to my church and I'm connected with that. That's great. Social networks are wonderful. But what makes the church more than that? Why do you keep coming? So this should be frustrating. I'm playing devil's advocate, right? What gets you to the boat? Well, my parents have faith and I have faith and I want my children to have faith. That's great. That's a tradition. But I go to a Cincinnati Red game with my buddy Jay every single year. That's a tradition too. What makes faith more than just a tradition? And don't let yourself off this hook easy. Play devil's advocate with yourself. What gets you in the boat? Well, is it like something else? Well, what makes faith more than that? That's the question. What makes it more than that? And it is a frustrating kind of mental exercise. And I'm sure eventually you'll want to throw your hands in the air and just go, I just don't know. I just do. But that frustration points that we are getting to the part of the brain that deals with feelings and behavior. And when you can put words around that feeling, that's what moves us from what gets us to church to why we are members of communities of faith. That starts to answer the question of why we are here. That's how we see the value of the community in our lives and of our lives in the community. And when you start to work on that description, when you start putting words to that frustration, that, friends, is in the ballpark of why you get in the boat. Now, I've said this before. My favorite line in this episode from Mark's Gospel is Jesus says, "Let us go to the other side." Let us make no mistake about it. The invitation into the boat comes from Jesus Christ our Lord. The safety and security of passage from one side to the other comes to us from Jesus Christ our Lord. Why we get in the boat, that's an answer only we know. But once we know why we get in the boat, once we know why the boat and this community of faith is so important to us, then we can start reflecting on how we invite people, not into the boat per se, but into the life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ and the communities of faith that we engage with weekly. And that is our task as the church, serving as outposts of God's kingdom in the communities in which we live. So let me ask you again, why do you get in the boat?